Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Texas Examiner. I'm Robert Sines, and this is my co-host, John Tipton.
Howdy, folks.
Today, we've got a great show, just like all the others we've had for you before, and that we're covering Kendall County. But today, we're going to talk about justice of the peace. And we have with us today in the studio a past justice of the peace, and we have a current justice of the peace. John, you brought these fine folks together. Why don't you introduce them?
Well, first, I'd like to introduce Miss Teri Nunley, who has been a long-term resident of Bernie and Kendall County, has been involved in the legal field for multiple decades, has a vast amount of experience and knowledge and resources to draw from. And her last public service was as JP for Precinct 1.
Correct.
And that was in 2017 through 2021?
Close. 2018 through 21.
Through 21. But you were appointed and then you were elected after that. Correct. So
well, you're a Googler and site. That's amazing.
Very excited and happy to have you on the show. Excited to hear what you're going to be able to share with us and as we progress through the discussion. And then we also have Justice Dave Neighbor from Precinct 2, JP,
yes, sir.
Who was just, you were elected this past
November.
In November.
Yep.
Okay, so you still got about 3 years left on your term. Okay, so the idea was to bring to the folks two different perspectives about being a justice of the peace, but more importantly, I think our listeners and our viewers don't really understand what a justice of the peace is and what they're expected to do.
I didn't until I had to deal with them.
Right. And most people don't have an opportunity to have to deal with a justice of the peace. And,
right.
And that can be a good thing and a bad thing, because on the flip side of the coin of all the difficult hats that you wear, you've got a plethora of other hats that you wear that are awesome and great services that you can provide the community, such as, performing marriage ceremonies. And we'll let y'all go into the other aspects of the job that are actually a positive influence, and you're not always dealing with the negative stuff like the evictions and the death calls, that type of thing.
Okay,
so
great.
That's really the gist of the show.
So who do we have kick off? What does a JP do?
Well, let's just take a look at that real quick. Let me, again, we're playing around with some new technology here, so I want to make sure that we're getting everybody the correct show here. And if I can put it on, there we go. So here is a little bit about what we're going to talk about. I want to cover the introduction to what a Texas of the Justice of the Peace is,
Okay.
A small historical overview, talk about the roles and responsibilities, the challenges, adaptations that need to be made or can be made, and then how you see the office in the future specific to Kendall County. And then we'll follow up with a few questions and answers. So just to give our viewers an understanding, the Office of Justice of the Peace has actually been around in Texas since the late 1700s, when it was introduced as, and I can't remember the terminology, but because Texas is based on Spanish rule versus common law from Europe, we had a Spanish approach to things. And so there was I can't remember his name. I was a Google guy yesterday, but now I can't remember it. But I think they called them alcaldes.
Alcaldes. Today in Spanish, that's a term that's used for mayors.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that was our very first Justice of the Peace in Texas. And then when we became a country, our own country, it was established by the Constitution. And now we've had several revisions and amendments to the Constitution since then. But it is an office created by the Texas Constitution.
Interesting.
So it's, like I say, it's had several iterations and changes to it, mainly dealing with the length of the term of office from 2 years to 4 years. So right now, I think we have about 800 roughly jurisdictions within the state. Y'all may know better. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah,
right around 800?
40, 50, something
Like that, right? And that's according to the Office of Court Administration. So again, we already covered the legal authority. So let's see what else. Key responsibilities. So I'm going to leave this up and we'll come back and revisit it in just a second. But for the time being, let's just talk about what it is that y'all do on a daily basis. And I'll cover those up, and then we'll kind of go into how y'all view that and how you approach it, and how you approached it as, when you were sitting, and how you approach it now. So we hear traffic cases. That's probably where most of the public gain their experience with you. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
So we're
Yeah.
talking traffic tickets. And I think one of the things that folks don't understand is that JP can hear criminal cases, but it's only if it's only punishable by a fine, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So that includes misdemeanors from traffic citations,
Correct.
which is the bulk of the work that you receive, correct?
On the criminal side.
On the criminal
yes.
side.
Yeah.
You also hear civil cases, and it used to be a $10,000 cap,
Mhm.
but I think a couple of years ago, the Texas legislature changed that to 20,000. So now you have a lot more on your shoulders of responsibility, because $20,000 that's still a lot of money.
Sure.
And it's especially a lot of money to the people that are appearing in your courtroom. And so it's probably very emotional, and people are trying to get their story across. And of note, they don't have to follow the same rules as they do in, say, a district court or a county court. The rules are slightly different.
Yeah.
Are they more flexible or?
Yes.
Much more flexible.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And the big difference also being that justice court, you're not required to have an attorney to represent you. You can come with an attorney, but you don't have to. We call those self-represented litigants.
And do you see that a lot, Dave, or do you
Most
see-
of the time it's
Okay.
that. Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting, because it can be a double-edged sword, because where you have rules of civil procedure in a higher court, which demand that, if you, for discovery, for example, if you want to present something in a case for, to the court, for you don't have to follow the same rules. And in some cases, the justices don't even have to allow it. Whereas in a higher court, if it's presented with petition, then they would have to hear it.
Right.
So you have a lot more discretion
Mm-hmm.
in that manner as well, which again could be a
Good or
double-edged
bad.
sword, right? Right. Landlord and tenant disputes.
Yes, many.
Do you have any examples that you can share with us? Some experiences that you've dealt with?
Precinct 1 had lots of apartments, lots of rentals. I had eviction cases every week,
Really?
and they had to be heard in a certain time.
Yeah.
Is it 20 days, 21?
That's the maximum. You have a
Something like
minimum
that.
of 10, I think 21 days it has to be held.
Yes, so you have those scheduled. Traffic court was once a month. And at the time I was there, we could hear a traffic case any other time, but most of the time it was the prosecutors across the street in the big courthouse would come over. They would schedule JP court one day a month, and all the JPs would send their cases to one court. Is it still done that
Yes,
way?
ma'am. It is. It is.
And when I was there, I would think, what I remember was JP4 had a lot more cases than the rest of everyone. And so sometimes I would spend all day doing traffic cases that weren't even mine.
Right.
So, yeah.
That
So
was
you
largely, Precinct 4 has a much larger piece of the interstate freeway.
They've got I-10.
They've
We're
got
talking about
I-10
Judge
from
Russell,
They
correct?
do, and so does JP1 have I-10, and
Has a
so does
piece.
JP2.
But ours is very small.
Right.
Yours is a little bigger, and then Judge Pressler's is quite large.
Mhm.
Right.
So she gets the lion's share of the traffic cases off of IT.
And that's interesting. While we're on that
I-10.
topic, I mean, can we agree that yes, people have, violated the law, there's infractions, and now we have traffic fines,
Right.
right? How much does the county rely on? And I'm thinking from a sales organization perspective, right?
Sure.
Because the more sales you have, now you can budget, you can forecast how much to spend on research and development. It's all part of the budget process. How much direct or indirect pressure would you receive from maybe leadership in the county saying, hey, you're down on your ticket count. You're not.
Does
you're
that
not-
really happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question.
It
Yeah.
does.
I think we all want to know that.
It-
I have never seen that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And part of that is we don't, as a judge, I don't issue tickets.
Right.
That's up to the state troopers, the constables, Bernie PD, the sheriff's office. And, a lot of it just has to do with the traffic, where
Right.
stuff is going on. Most of my traffic violations are on 46.
Mm.
We've had high school kids doing 100 in a 45-mile-an-hour zone.
Mhm.
That's dangerous.
Yeah.
Especially on these roads.
Yes, sir, it is. It's a
Yes.
two-way road.
Would you agree with that? That there's no
I would.
political pressure internally, maybe
No.
externally from the.
When I was there, we had a commissioner that was all about the numbers.
Okay.
And I was asked to bring the numbers up. But the reason why, when I took over JP1, it was 7 years behind. It had so many files that were not prosecuted, were not handled at
Haven't
all.
been adjudicated yet.
No, and I spent 3 years trying to bring the court back up to date. There were so many files that had to be dismissed because the statute of limitations was 2 years. Well, we were past the 2-year mark.
Mhm.
So I had stacks and stacks after we went through them to make sure that they had never been touched, never prosecuted, a letter had never gone out. You couldn't find the people, the phone numbers were outdated.
This was when, more or less, 2018?
2018
Not too
when
long
I
ago.
took it over.
Right.
And I think that was due to just not enough hours in the day.
Right.
We had one clerk, one judge. The judge works 24/7 or is on call. So when you schedule court and then you're out all night, you've still got to go to court and do your hearings, your settings. So yeah, it was a different ballgame than when I thought when I took over.
Mm.
Judge James was the judge before me, and he was completely worn out. He was exhausted. His health was not good. He tried over and over to get help. The county would not give the funds for another clerk, for a substitute judge in any way. So I took over thinking that, oh, I'm energetic, I'm young, I can do this. But I had no idea how far behind the court was.
Right.
And I'm a worker. If I've got work to do, I'm going to work.
Sure.
So I found myself working weekends, nights, days, just to get everything set. And then Precinct 1 has the emergency room. So the emergency room would get the car wrecks where they were close to death.
Right.
I had the only one emergency room in the county. And I had,
Oh, I love it. She brought.
Oh, you brought.
I
brought
brought my report
homework.
that I gave to Commissioner's Court on my 3rd year.
Okay.
The beginning of my 3rd year, that JP1 in 2020 had 30 inquests. JP2 had 22. JP3 had 13. And JP4 had 24. JP4 covers a huge area. So these seem more balanced because when I came on, the JPs didn't rotate. They didn't have weekends off, time off, and that's another reason why.
They didn't rotate. You mean you worked your
No.
own precinct and that's it? The other
And the
JPs
other
couldn't back you up?
JPs only wanted to work their precinct. They didn't want to have to come to
And-
the emergency room.
And has that changed now, Dave?
It has.
Okay,
It
so you
has.
all kind of cover for each other now?
Yes, and the
That's
way it
great.
works now, Monday through Thursday, talking Monday, 8 o'clock in the morning, to Friday, 8 o'clock in the morning, you cover your own precinct
I see.
for all matters.
Right.
Then there's some things that are, well, I'll go back to that, by law has to be done within the precinct. For instance, evictions.
Mhm.
Another precinct can't normally handle an eviction. But going back to the question of duty, we rotate every weekend. So, for instance, Precinct 1 has the first weekend of the month, and that runs from Friday, Monday morning, or Friday, 8 o'clock in the morning to Monday morning. at 8 o'clock. So you have a 72-hour period. They handle everything in the county. I have the weekend 2. Precinct 3 has weekend 3. Precinct 4 has
Y'all are on
weekend
call,
4.
kind of like doctors that are on
Yeah,
call.
we're on
cover each
call.
other.
Yeah.
Every morning we go in and do magistration, do the arraignment of prisoners that have been arrested in the previous 24 hours. And then the rest of it's on call. And that on call would either be an inquest, a death investigation, or an emergency detention order or emergency protective order. Those are things that you
Blood
No,
warrants,
the-
that type of thing.
pardon?
And blood warrants. Yeah.
Well, blood warrants got taken away from us when Judge Stolarczyk
Oh,
was elected.
okay.
Because
county judge.
Yeah, the county judge. Once he came in, we lost the right to issue blood warrants. If among the judges in the county by law, if they're besides the district court, if anybody else has a law degree, then the justice court, anybody who's doesn't have a law degree, as the case in our county, we don't have a county court of law.
Right.
So what happened was we lost the right to issue blood warrants. We can issue some search warrants that are non-evidentiary. We can issue arrest warrants, but we can no longer issue blood warrants.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
No,
Now, if Judge Stolarczyk were to leave and be replaced at some point by a
They can change
non-attorney,
that.
yeah, he would resign for some reason or opted not to run for election. And replaced by someone like Judge Lux, who didn't have a law degree, then we regain the blood warrant capability.
So it's simply it's a matter of education versus function, meaning that since Judge Stolarczyk has a law degree,
Yes, and he's a member of the
sits in
bar. Yeah,
then he's the one now issuing
he's the backup to Judge
to
Cahoon.
Judge Cahoon.
Yeah.
We took on a little more work, sounds like then.
Well, that's
Is that
probably
by choice or is that kind of
No, it's the
default?
law. It's
That's
the
the law.
law.
That's
Yeah.
what you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well then he had no choice.
Right.
Well,
Well, I kind of, I don't know. I don't know
Something
how I
different.
feel about that. I mean, I know it's written in the law, but
Right.
that's a responsibility I'm not sure I would want to have.
Right.
Mhm.
You know, issuing blood warrants, that's a very, very touchy subject, or at least it was about 4 years ago when I think when you were getting ready to run, and before Shane started running, that was a really hot topic.
When I was there, Judge Cahoon wanted to do them all. That was part of what she ran on, was she would be available for blood warrants.
Right.
And she really didn't want the JPs doing them. So,
Well, you know,
We'll have to have her on the show one day
we
and
would
ask
have
her
to
about
talk about that. Right. Right.
that. And bring both judges.
I think that'd be awesome.
A good idea.
That'd be a great idea.
it would.
Hey, before we go any further, I'd like to know a little bit more about, I know you know both these guests today, but I'd like to find a little bit more about your background. What I've read on Dave, it intrigues me, myself being a former federal agent, you were with the CIA, is that correct?
I retired from there.
Yeah, can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure,
or
sure.
We got to black this out.
No, I mean, there are limits to the conversation, but
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
some things I can discuss.
Tell us a little bit about your previous career.
Well, I started out as a U.S. Marine.
Thank you.
Became a Christian while I was in the Marine Corps, served in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. And when I came home, I studied theology and biblical studies, worked in ministry for about 8 years, most of it overseas. And following that, I came back to I was looking at doing some doctoral studies at Stanford University and got recruited by CIA to go into the clandestine service. And I spent my career undercover and worked as an operations officer overseas, basically finding foreigners who could spy for us
Sure.
and give us non-public information. And I ran those cases and was chief of station several times towards the end of my career, and then retired when my family threatened to have me see a psychiatrist if I didn't
Right.
retire.
Right.
So it's a lot of moves.
Yeah. Well, Kendall County is a great place for a retired CIA agent. And
It is. Well, technically, we're called officers.
officers, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And people get confused with the FBI and other
Sure.
federal law enforcement, but we refer to ourselves as officers, and then the foreigners that we recruit to spy for us, we refer to as agents
Agents, okay.
because they're under contract,
Gotcha.
if you will, from a legal
good to know.
context.
What time frame was this in?
I went into CIA in '88.
Okay.
I retired in '06, but I continued to work under contract until '15.
So you definitely have been involved directly or indirectly with some of the more prevalent world events that have
I've served in
transpired.
6 wars.
So thank you for your
Thank
service,
you.
because I think that's
Thank you,
another.
Dave.
It was an honor, and the people I served with were phenomenal
Great.
people.
I would only expect the best from an
Yeah.
organization like that.
So
We sure do. And Teri, you have, from what I've read, you've got some court experience.
I do.
Tell us a little bit about that as well.
I've been a court reporter since 1981, official court reporter and freelance court reporter.
That's interesting. We
Yeah.
have a lot of talent here.
Yeah.
A whole lot of talent.
Lots of time in the courtroom.
Wow. And so Teri, so you were a JP for how long?
3 years.
3 years. And what happened? Why aren't you a JP anymore?
I couldn't see my family. Even if you got the weekends covered by another JP, you could not take off for 4 days, 3 days during the week. You didn't have a week vacation. You didn't have any downtime with your family. And it was hard on me. It was, and I worked hard at it 24/7. So I have a daughter in LA and one in New York. And, they're important to
Talk
me.
about spreading yourself thin.
My family's in Dallas, Fort Worth. And to go there, I had to do it on a weekend where there was coverage.
So has that changed at all? How do you take vacation?
Well, when I first got elected, I didn't really anticipate taking much,
Right.
but I've been able to find it and make it work. A lot of it is I make a very conscious effort to cover the other judges when they've got, some of them, for instance, Judge Van Staveren still has children at home. They compete in sports. And been a lot of times I cover her for the afternoon or the evening when she's out of town with one of her children. Similarly, this last Thanksgiving, I was able to go the week before Thanksgiving on vacation with my daughter and her husband and a friend from the agency and his wife. And my wife and I had coverage for the week, and we left. But the trade which wasn't a hard trade. I offered the judge who covers Thanksgiving that I would cover their weekend for Thanksgiving, including Thanksgiving Day, which isn't a part of that.
Right.
And they readily took the offer, and so I had a week off. Actually, I had more than that. I had 9 days off where I was able to be gone.
That's awesome. 'Cause that's definitely a change from what it was, and it sounds
A big
as if
change. And I think it's all about bringing new people in that want the balance. When I came in, all the JPs had been there for so long, they didn't want to trade. JP2, Judge Brumhall would change with me and cover me, and I would cover him at times. But to ask for a week, they just didn't want to do it.
Unheard of.
They wanted to cover their precincts and no one else's, and they did not want the emergency room.
Well, I've got a question along those lines, Teri, for both of you is, can a JP delegate their authority or responsibility to, let's say, a physician when there's
inquest?
for inquest? Can you all do that if
No, I actually had a forensic scientist that wanted to help Precinct 1 cover all the inquests, and the county said no.
Is that still the case, Dave?
Well, I don't know about the past.
Right.
Currently, a physician can sign.
Okay.
The problem you run into is, particularly with the emergency room Methodist Hospital here in Bernie, there is a corporate policy that they cannot sign. And part of it is framed within the framework of that, and this is, I understand from a physician, so it's secondhand, that unless somebody has stayed in the hospital for at least 24 hours, well, it's not technically a hospital. It's an emergency room.
Right.
Correct.
A souped up urgent care, if you will.
Right.
And so corporate policies, they won't sign. So we have to show up. On the other hand, I had a lady who died in hospice down at Fair Oaks Ranch. And I went there and showed up and did the investigation and wrote it up. But her doctor, through the hospice program that she was in, signed the death certificate.
Interesting.
So, yes, a physician can sign, but a lot of times they'll balk if they haven't seen them for a long time.
Right. Well, I asked because I personally witnessed a case here in Bernie some years back where a physician was working on a Sunday and treating a patient that ended up, dying in the clinic, and in her clinic at the time. Unfortunately, there was no JP to be found, and
Really?
that day, or the JP, I guess, in the precinct. And so I remember the family members were there in the waiting room, and time was ticking. And I think what finally happened was the JP called the physician herself and said, you can go ahead and make that decision. And so I always wondered about that. If
Yeah, the physician can.
they can, even
sign
though
it, but a lot of them don't like to.
I
don't
know,
if it's
yeah, I know she
liability
didn't want
issues
to
or
either, but I think
what it is.
we had no choice at that point. It's good to
Well,
know.
and in Texas, because there are the good and the bad, you want an independent investigation.
Correct.
A physician is really good to sign the death certificate when they're in hospice. They know the end of life is coming, whether it's cancer or some other bad disease. But normally in a normal situation, you would want a death investigated.
Right.
And you have to have an independent person, not the doctor on call.
That's good.
Well, and it's almost like a conflict of interest. And that's why when
Right.
you raise the issue with me, I'm like, I'm pretty sure just based on the job description, why would a JP want to delegate that, number one, to somebody else?
Especially when it's the physician's own patient.
It's the physician's own patient.
Right.
Yeah, you can't sign. I wouldn't think that you'd be able to sign
No.
that
Right.
if it's your patient.
Mm-hmm.
Normally.
I tell you a quick story. Back when I was doing contract work, I dealt with a lot of federal law enforcement agencies. And one of them was the U.S. Marshal Service. And one day, this guy that was in a class that I was teaching, and we were doing street exercises and things like this, found out that he was actually the fellow with Judge Scalia when he passed away down in the Rio Grande Valley. And he said he had just dropped him off, went back to his hotel. As soon as he got to his hotel, he got a phone call. Judge Scalia's had a heart attack. He drives out there, the body's gone. The JP had taken control over it.
Oh.
And declared that it was a natural death, and end of story.
My goodness.
And, and I raised this when some of these questions came up in the campaign when I was running. And I said, I have problems with that because the whole structure, that whole GP thing is precisely what you're talking about, is a control on that. Judge Scalia was not just a Supreme Court justice, but notable guy as a constitutionalist. And that particular political profile in the location where he died, I understand, was very, very blue. And so, it's caused people to spin conspiracy theories. Maybe he was murdered. Maybe this happened. Nobody will know because nobody did an autopsy.
Nobody did a real investigation.
They didn't do a real investigation. And, there are certain people that come up in life, like a Judge Scalia, that you may be 90% certain that this person had a heart attack, but you owe it to the public.
Right.
To do an autopsy and to be able to document this and say, listen, a physician has done a thorough autopsy and there's no monkey business here. There's no poison, there's no stabbing or anything of this sort.
Right. Reminds me of a case in Bernie about, been about 20 years now. You may recall Lieutenant Colonel Philip Shue.
Oh, yeah.
I do.
I know the story.
Judge James was the JP.
And there's still quite a bit of controversy surrounding that whole thing.
There
I'm not
is.
quite sure how an individual can have his hands taped to a steering wheel and taped to the gas pedal be declared a suicide.
Yeah.
And as a private investigator, I've worked multiple death investigations. I've worked, missing. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an expert, but I've been in the field enough to know. If it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck.
Yeah.
I mean, Occam's razor is pretty dang accurate. So, but it's interesting. And I think that's something that the general public don't really understand, the level of responsibility. So here you are as justice of the peace and the constable, and arguably the sheriff, we're all on a level playing field. We're at the first line, what I call the first line of defense at the county level, right? Aside from your city officials, but everything happens at the county level. And so we look at national politics and state politics today and the partisan politics going on where, the narrative of the day is the left is so far left, they don't make any sense. The right is so far right, they're just out of their minds. And we're left with this big pile of stuff in the middle, right? And what do we call that? Society's all about labeling things today, right? So how do you label these
The middle?
voters.
Normal?
Yeah, the normal folks in the middle, when all they want is the truth. They don't
Right.
need the fanfare and the politics or the conspiracy theories.
Right.
So is it incumbent upon you as the first, what I call the first line of defense, and even though JPs aren't now currently way out into the public, you don't see them usually making news conferences or commenting on party politics per se, but should you?
You're still, it's an elected position.
I maintain that as an elected official, you absolutely should be out there still connecting with the constituents, even though you are busy. I mean, you're busy 12 hours a day at least, I'm gathering, probably more if you're.
It varies from day to day.
Right.
Some days are
How,
full,
how
some
do
days-
they connect? I mean, outside of their
I don't
normal
know.
duties?
That's
Well, there are some constraints. By law in Texas, a judge cannot endorse a candidate.
correct.
We can encourage somebody to contribute to our own campaign.
cannot?
No, we
Okay.
can't. To our own campaign, yes, but
So it's similar like the federal Hatch Act, like can you
yes,
attend
very similar to
you
the
can
Hatch
attend
Act.
their
Yeah, you
events
can
or?
attend and you can vote, but you're not to side with it. And common sense really is, do you want to endorse somebody running against somebody you're already working with,
Right.
and then end up
Damaging that relationship.
damaging that relationship? So, you, particularly on the primary side, you want to stay out of it. Let all the candidates, make their case. If they get through the primary and they finally come out as the candidate from the party you represent,
Right.
but still you can't endorse anybody. So and that applies to any judge, county judge, justice of the peace,
Right, justice of the
district
peace.
court, or county court at law. So
That's true. I think part of that reasoning is for the judges to remain objective.
Mhm.
If you take sides, you're gonna look one way or another
no-winner.
on an issue that you haven't even spoke on.
Let me clarify that just a little bit. I guess from the political perspective of, participating, I think what I'm getting more to is community involvement, right? Where should the JP be in the community involvement arena? And whether that's volunteering with organizations, but I just want to see, if I'm paying your salary, and I say if I'm paying, the constituents are paying your salary, how do they reach out and know, how do you get graded on your job performance? How is the general public going to understand what it is that you do and how well you're doing that job if you're not out there communicating it? And I'm using that term loosely. I'm not pointing the
I
finger.
think this is a good first step for them to come on the Texas Examiner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
They're willing
This is a great way.
Yeah.
to talk about this.
I use a couple of things that I've seen, and I think Judge Nunley would agree. Every eviction, I find the evictions the most difficult from an emotional viewpoint on the part of the defendant. They're not paying rent for one reason or another. It's very emotional to be thrown out of your
Absolutely.
home. Truancy is another one. It's emotional, but for different reasons. And behind every eviction and every truancy is not just a violation of some sort, be it civil or administrative. There's something else going on.
Right.
And usually with the truancy, there's a broken home involved, there's alcoholism, there's narcotics abuse. With the evictions, there could be fighting in the home, could be family violence that's gone unreported. And I'm very interested in looking at what can we, in our position as a county or the city of Bernie in their position, what can we do to ameliorate these things, to mitigate these issues that end up in the court to being eviction? Similarly, I remember years ago when I first met Sheriff Al Oxer, I went to the Citizens Law Enforcement Academy. It's back when we first moved to Bernie back in 2012. And he made the comment, which I found really interesting, was that everybody in the jail has committed a violation, but 70% of them belong in a mental institution. And that stunned me. And I read more about it. And pretty much that's the consensus across law enforcement, senior law enforcement officials in the United States. There's always a mental health component in this. Well, subsequently, the legislature passed a law, it's called 1622, and 1622 mandates that at certain points when somebody has been arrested, and the JP is really the first one in line after the officer who did the arrest, we have to provide an evaluation whether this person is intellectually unable to understand what happened, if their mental health is of such that they really aren't in control of their faculties or their actions, and they look, by all intents, they look fit to stand trial for whatever they've been
So
arrested for.
it's subjective. I mean, there's no.
It is subjective, and none of us, at least in the county that I'm aware of, are licensed psychologists or psychiatrists either. But what it does, it gives us first whack at it, and then if someone appears to be somewhat out of balance and has behavioral issues, we can refer that to the county mental health authority. And they can in turn, get a hold of a telepsych, a audio-visual interview, or they can bring in a psychologist or psychiatrist locally
To evaluate them.
and do a more thorough evaluation. Or in some cases, they send them off to Kerrville and have them evaluated there.
We recently had a psychiatrist here on our program at Texas Examiner, Dr. Melissa Duder, and that was a fascinating show. One of the things that she mentioned that stuck with me, John, was that all of us are suffering from some type of mental
Absolutely. Yep.
health situation. We don't want to admit it, but it's how we manage it. And by that, when we say mental health, the stigma is not you're crazy. It's you may be depressed today, or your loved one
PTSD.
passed away, or PTSD from
Past experiences.
So we all suffer and we all manage them differently. And I think that's good that you think that way, Dave. That I think the word is empathy. That comes to my mind is being empathetic with all these people that we encounter. And you and I have been in law enforcement, and I think that's what I would pride myself in. When I was arresting somebody, I was trying to put myself in their shoes. And how can I respect them and keep their dignity?
There's a trauma there.
Yes.
And, you may have seen in the Bernie Star on Sunday, I was gratified to see, and I have to have a piece of paper and cheat sheet because the title is so long, Kendall County Behavior Advisory Coalition.
Yes.
And it's a great article because it talks about these very issues about the role of mental health. They have formed what I call a subcommittee, but it's actually a working group. And it's that whole title, Kendall County Behavior Advisory Coalition - Judicial and Law Enforcement Working Group. And I represent the JPs on that committee.
Great.
And so we're looking at these issues. But I mean, some of the problems are statewide in Texas. From what I read in the Texas County magazine that goes out every month, there's roughly 10,000 beds, psychiatric beds available. Only 3,000 are staffed for lack of funding. Now, I don't know where that lack of funding is coming from or what the issue is. Maybe the money is there. They can't find the people. But the fact of the matter is 3 out of 10 that's all we've got.
That's sad. Yeah.
And so somebody who needs to be in a psychiatric facility, they have to wait a year, 2, 3 years to get in. So what do you do with these people?
Well, thank you for being part of the committee. I mean, that's a good example of what you just asked.
I think it's a step definitely in the right
direction. Politics, John. It is an elected position. Y'all's position. So far, Dave, I'm curious. You've been in the grinder for a year and a half or so.
A year.
A year.
Yeah,
Do you foresee running for re-election?
I'm planning on it.
You are okay. Yeah. How do you feel about term limits, though?
I think, a lot of it has to do with, are you able to manage it? People get senile at different stages of life. Health issues come into play.
True.
And when people ask if I'm going to run again, God willing, I will. But a lot of that's going to be, where's my health at? Not just my physical, but my mental health as well.
That's good.
And I rely on my wife for 48 years to be a measure of that, as well as my colleagues.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, so it's
the answer is yes. So we can be looking for you in the campaign again in a couple of years, probably.
Lord willing.
Yes.
When you look on the federal level, I wish the federal government legislature ran like the Texas one. Yeah. Don't pay people too much.
Right.
They have jobs.
I was wondering when
they need to have jobs
was.
And go home.
Don't pay them too much.
I love that you said that.
And have some turnover.
Yes. Okay, so now we're talking term limits,
yes.
Right? And I think, well, actually, it's not. I know that it's been a part of the Republican Party platform that they pay a lot of lip service to, right? Oh yeah, we think that we should have term limits, but you never see anything done about it. So my perspective, my interpretation of that is that politics in our country have changed from the way that the founders originally intended our elected representatives to work, right? So if we go back 250 years ago when we're putting together the country, we're still in horse and buggy, and people are having to travel from all over parts of the country to get to Washington, D.C. in order to have, Congress, in order to have their sessions, right? So they had to allow for time to travel. And as time went on, travel became easier. We have planes, trains, automobiles.
Now we got Zoom.
And Zoom, right? Well, along with that, it transitioned into a full-time job, which was, I don't believe, what our founders really ever intended. You were supposed to be elected, go serve your time, make your laws, whatever you're going to do while you're in DC, and then you come back home to your family and your regular profession. We don't do that anymore. And that's being force-fed, I believe, from the top down, because it's turned into a much bigger machine than anybody really ever anticipated. And so instead of pushing our topics and the things that are important to the local community, because this is where the rubber meets the road, right, is right here at the county level, we should be pushing those policies and those desires and the things that we need here on the ground up versus down.
That's why I asked, we also, in one of our episodes, we had County Commissioner Richard Chapman from Precinct 3. And Richard, to his credit, he said this is his last, he's going to run for re-election, and he says this is it. He promised he'd run 2 terms, and that was it.
That was
so
it.
We'll see. I think he will.
I would just like to see people actually do what they say they're going to do,
right?
Or what they believe in. It's one thing, and I think I believe in the God Almighty and Jesus Christ is my Savior. But if you're going out and you don't act like that, well, then really, where are you?
Where are you?
You stand, right?
Right.
All right. You're walking that fence line, and there are several elected officials in Kendall County that have been here for over 3 decades.
My goodness,
3 decades.
Yeah.
And I find that extremely, I personally think that they need to go home. They've probably done a great job. In fact, I'm confident that these individuals have done a fabulous job. But there are other people that can bring new life, to your point, new blood, new ideas to the organization, to the county. And I just think that term limits ought to be something that we implement from the county level on up.
Sure,
and maybe
sure.
get
May bring more people out to run too.
Absolutely.
And, Teri, what about you? Do you think you're going to get back into politics anytime soon?
I loved being JP. Absolutely loved it. I love people. I love working one-on-one with them. I love the courtroom. Have been there, spent my life career in the courtroom. And the thing about JP Court, most people in the community will have some kind of connection with the JP Court more so than they'll ever go to district court.
Right.
It is the people's court. They need an avenue to go to for justice, whether it's a fence down. I had a golf cart run into a car with a 13-year-old driving the golf cart, and they didn't want to pay for the damages. Pets,
Everyday
animals
things, yes.
are a lot of it. So the community needs a way to get justice and feel like that they can go and voice their concerns.
It'll be fair.
Yes, it should be fair. And I think that's one of the reasons why JP Court went up to 20,000. You should not have to pay an attorney to go present your claim. You should be able to present it to a reasonable, non-prejudicial person, independent. And I also think it's great that JPs are not lawyers because they are well-rounded, they are well-experienced, they're very, very smart.
You have to rely on common sense.
Yes. But back
So
to
glad
your,
It's not so common sometimes. No.
back
Law
to
books
your
aren't always common
question,
sense.
yes, some people in the state of Texas want JPs to have to be lawyers.
There was a big
God
push for that.
forbid.
There was a push for that.
There
several
was
years
a
ago.
push for
Yeah.
that. I do not think that should happen.
Agreed.
It'll jam up the system.
Yes.
If you're the people's court, you need someone who has a life experience, that has a balance of life, and has not worked 18 hours a day to hear your case. To be 24/7 as a JP is unreasonable.
Right.
So Terry, sounds like I don't know if you're giving me an answer. It sounds like you do want to get back into politics.
I loved being JP.
But JP, no other political
But I did
aspirations?
not, I didn't like the 24/7
Well, what
because
about-
I don't know where to stop with work. If there's work to do, I do it.
Well, maybe you should run for mayor or county judge or county commissioner.
Well,
would that be something in your cards for the future?
well, I know commissioners don't get called out at night, so
There you go. There's a nice
we'll
The
see.
quality of life.
quality of life job. I'm not going to say it's
Absolutely.
cush because
No,
Commissioner
heck no.
Chapman told us all the money he's got.
They're
He got a lot of work.
working their rear ends
But
off.
the having some kind of normalcy or quality of life sounds like good.
Yes.
So what
If-
it sounds
if you could have normalcy as an official
right.
and balance, which I think the people deserve. When I was JP, I never understood why it was 24/7. I could work 12, 14 hours that day and do cases, do the files, work, be at the courthouse all day long like a commissioner really wanted me to be. But then I was called out at 2 or 3 in the morning or midnight. And dispatch called me 2, 3 times in one night. And I had a full court hearing scheduled the next day. And so I'm not sure how you can be your best. Anyone can do it for 2 or 3 years, but can you do it long term? And I think the JPs should rotate. When I started working on it, I called other counties the size of Kendall County and started taking questionnaires of JPs. Why do you do this job? Are you 24/7? Do you rotate? And most of the response was, I would not do this job without a rotation schedule. Because if you could be on call 1 week a month and then do your court and your other files, all that during your other 3 weeks of the month
It sounds like you are
and
doing that
have
now, right?
family.
That's
Yeah,
good.
a version of that. we
That's
are.
good.
But again, too, to answer your question, I'm all about term limits. I do not think we need career politicians in county government.
Absolutely.
Good.
I do not think they should be there more than 2 terms. And I think they deserve people who know the law, like JP2, who have had some experience in the law.
Yes,
You made a great point earlier, and I have to liken it to our over-the-road truck drivers and our airline pilots
physicians.
and physicians, where they, you can only work so long, and then you
Right.
have to take time off. And when we're talking
Exactly.
about people's lives, yes, they're being evicted from their homes. They're being sued for something maybe they did or didn't do, or whatever. Their world became narrowly focused the day that they appear in your courtroom. And they deserve 100% of your best. And I don't see how, as a JP, and I have never been in that position, though I ran for it and was with the understanding of what the job would entail. I just don't see how somebody that has been in office for so long, working those types of hours, can still remain objective and apply current a current way of thinking or a new way of approaching a case. I just don't think it can be done, and I don't think we're built that way. I don't think God built us that way to do that.
Well, I can't really comment on other judges, what they've
Right.
done, but as I point out to litigants, if you don't like the decision that comes out of my court or any JP court, you can always appeal.
And they appeal
And
to the district court at that
Appeal
point.
to the district court.
But that also takes money.
It can.
The people's court is all about being afforded an opportunity for justice without having to be rich and hire an attorney. So, and JP Court has no record. There's no court reporter, no transcript. There's nothing to appeal. or
They basically have to start over from
they have
scratch.
Yeah.
to
De
completely
novo. You
start over.
from the beginning.
And you have to have an attorney to appeal it to district court.
Judicial process is expensive. Well, John, speaking of term limits, I think I think we've got to let these fine folks get back to their work.
We can. I did have a couple other questions. I know you're trying to shut us down, but we've got a little bit of time that we can edit
Okay.
on this. If you'll allow me just
Absolutely.
a little bit of grace.
I'll give you one more turn.
Okay. All right. One more time.
One more time.
As the community is growing,
Yeah.
right? Because we are. Kendall County is just gangbusters
It
right
is.
now, and it's not going to stop anytime soon.
not.
Despite what all the naysayers say, it's not going to change. But are we? If you can look up here on there's our precinct, and I think the viewers are able to see
Precinct
the map.
1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah.
Right, and it's
4 pretty
basically
large.
you look at it geographically, and you see Precinct 4 and Precinct 3 have the lion's share of the real estate.
They
Least
do.
density of
Right.
population, though.
They do.
Right. And then, it's based on population. So, but I think, or we could be approaching the time, because we're authorized up to 8 JPs by the Constitution. Are we getting to the point where maybe we need to reduce some of the workload and spread it out and maybe bring on a 5th
That is a
JP?
good question.
Interesting question. I don't know how that would compare with other counties, how that goes. I mean, you got to look at the cost of another salary of a judge, clerk. Right now, we're averaging 1.5 clerks per court. As I have a full-time clerk, and I have another clerk that's half-time. The other half-time, she's in another court. So it's basically 6 clerks over.
Right.
But if we went to at least one other clerk, maybe 2, and then another judge, does the county have the money for that? It's a good question.
So salaries now are what, about 110?
Oh, no.
What are they at?
For a judge?
For a JP?
They are.
Commissioners are 110, I believe.
It went up. We were at 73,333, and it went up, I think, 6%
Okay.
this year.
Yeah.
And then there's a vehicle allowance because we use our private vehicles.
Right, to go back and forth.
Yeah.
That still seems, I don't think I think the county is getting a hell of a deal for 76,000.
Oh, I do too.
Absolutely.
When I filed,
For
this is kind of a joke,
24/7.
but when I filed, I didn't know there was a salary.
Right.
Oh,
And it was after I filed, somebody said, there's a salary. And I said, I didn't know that,
nice.
And so, but yeah, it could be more. It could be less.
It probably well, it could be. We've looked at the budget numbers before. I don't really see why we couldn't somehow figure out to lessen the workload for you. I mean, the county's got the money now. Of course, there's people who say, "Oh, hell, I can't believe you said that. We don't have the money to do."
It's where they spend it.
It's where they spend it. I mean, do you want the new latest and greatest radios, or do you want to have somebody actually out there mitigating some of the things that are putting these people in jail to begin with?
When
Well,
you have
ahead.
JPs that work with truancy, they take one-on-one with that student. They find out why they're not going to school. I had a father, talk about juveniles, I had a father come in and sit in front of my desk. His son would not show up for court for his traffic ticket. And he said, "Judge, I need help. I don't know where to start." When he has a court hearing, he runs away at night. He'll come back a week later, so on and so on. So I had my bailiff. The father knew where he was. I had my bailiff, Michael Hudson, who's battling cancer now, go get him. He brought him to the courtroom, and I sat down with the individual and was like, "What's going on?" And, there were so many things going on with him, but in the course of 2 or 3 months, spending time working on that one case with that family, I kept that juvenile from going to district court. Juvenile services in Kendall County came over. We actually gave him some options. We gave him some restrictions. I took his driver's license away. You cannot drive in Kendall County if you're not going to go by the law, the rules. And anyway, long story short, this juvenile ended up going to a military home between here and Houston. and it was just for boys, and they had mentors there, everything. I cannot get him in. He had to get him in himself. They go for an interview. It's all troubled kids. This individual came back to my court within a year, gave testimony about what this place had done for him, got him straight with his family.
Great ending to the story.
That
It was
is
a great
awesome.
ending. But if we have JPs that work with our people, the people's court, they take time and they want to service the community. The JP court can be huge in this county to keep crime down, to keep traffic accidents down. Like our latest Kendall Bachelor that killed someone on a road. No one took time to keep that girl from driving in Kendall County. That should have been stopped long before she killed someone.
Yes, sure.
And I was in the habit of taking driver's license away if they were going 100 miles an hour. They're 16 years old. They're racing on the streets. And, you know, something's got to be done. We've got to protect the people in Kendall County. And we can do that at the JP level if we have time.
I started after doing several truancies and finding that motivation was a major issue, and a lot of young men in particular just didn't want to go to school anymore. So I talked to the county jail, Lieutenant Green, and with Sheriff Al Oxer. What would be the possibility of setting up some sort of a program where some of these young men could be brought through, and not to exclude women, but most of these cases happen to be young men, have them have a tour of the jail.
Like Scared Straight?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there was a program in the past called
Sure.
Project Care
Right.
that we had here in the county. So we're going to reconstitute that.
Awesome.
And,
Glad to hear that.
Yeah. And you arrive at the Sally Port.
Right.
And
Dress them up.
You know, that
and-
would be we should follow along if we get an opportunity and see how that works.
Absolutely.
Well,
It's a
if-
great
At
idea.
from the beginning to the end.
yeah,
I
self-permitted.
actually
think it's a
did
great idea.
that with 2 individuals. And my bailiff, I would call over there and talk to Lieutenant Green. I've got one that I need a little shock in him of what's going to happen if he doesn't change his life.
Right.
And the bailiff would take him over there. It wasn't part of any program. It's a JP that will take the time
So you could do that right now, as you were
to
saying.
care about the people, the families, hold them together, hold them accountable in Kendall County. You don't need a program for that. You need a call to Lieutenant Green and say, can my bailiff bring this guy over? I need you to spend 30 minutes with him showing him the inside of that jail because what I can do is all I can do is take his license away. But if he doesn't change his life and become accountable and a responsible person, so any JP can do that. You don't need a program with money to do that. That's what the
Doesn't
constables
cost
do.
anything.
Right.
It doesn't cost anything.
Mhm.
And our jail, Lieutenant Green, is absolutely agreeable to any time you need to call over there and say, I need some help.
That's wonderful to know.
I think that's a great idea. And I'd like to
Yes,
see
but
that.
a lot of the JPs don't take that kind of time. It takes time. We're on call all night long.
And
I
you're
also
trying to
had
find other solutions for each individual case.
I also had any child under 17 that got a traffic ticket had to read a book. A book in my office was checked out or they could get their own. I had more parents come to me and say, thank you.
It's very creative.
Yes, it was by one of our great military colonels. Make Your Bed. I forgot the name.
It's probably, what's his name? The
Admiral, maybe.
He's up at
Yes,
UT.
but if you
SEALs,
have certain
commander.
things that the military give these great people who serve us, and you have these things to do during the day, and you feel accomplished
Yes.
at the end of the day, and we're talking about our young adults, their parents are at work, And someone in the community needs to take interest in these kids besides juvenile court.
And that's interesting because that's what psychiatrist Melissa Duder said here
It
too.
is.
In our program, she says, you know, that a child really doesn't always need, if they have bad parents, that's not an excuse. Sometimes
Correct.
it takes a coach, a person in the community that can be their role model and show them love and attention, and that can change the whole scenario. Because that's what's missing in a lot of these like active shooters and people like that.
Yeah.
Someone didn't take the time to reach out to them, and you can't always blame the parents or the teachers.
They
There's other people
want to
that can
blame
reach.
the parents,
Right.
but we, you know,
It takes one of us can do it. A neighbor.
it takes a village.
relative. Yes,
It takes
absolutely.
a village, and we care in Kendall County.
It does sound like yes. It does sound
You
like
know, there's a lot of new drivers on the road that their parents work 8-10 hours a day,
yes.
and there's no one that they can go to be mentored
That's
here
a
in
good role
Kendall
the community
County.
for our JPs. I didn't realize that you all did so much more other than just
Oh.
sit behind a, you know,
I
and
think it
pass
depends.
judgment.
It depends on the JP. Some will
True.
take that time, some won't.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why I was worn out. I took the time. The juveniles were the ones I wanted to spend time with.
And that's something to keep in
I
mind
love
as
kids,
voters, John, as you were saying.
Absolutely.
Next time your JP is running for office or someone's running for office, ask those questions. You know, now that we're better educated what JPs do, ask them what they're going to do in their community to make a difference, not just pass judgment,
Absolutely.
but what can they do to prevent problems from like you're doing, Dave. You know, calling the jail. You're being proactive and seeing if we can, you know,
Yeah, trying to find
help-
tools
Trying to find tools instead
Yeah,
of just sitting back
to have an
and
impact.
going through the normal.
Because
day-to-day.
every kid in truancy is different. They got different issues. I had 2 kids at one point who weren't showing up. They were in elementary school. I get them into the courtroom, and mom is a single mom working 2 jobs back to back as a nurse in San Antonio. So
Oh,
she's
goodness.
working 16-hour days, 6 days a week. And kids are not waking up and going to school. One of them was in middle school, one in elementary school. And that's tough.
That is hard.
There's some tough situations.
Yes, and our schools are good. We have great teachers. We have great
Yeah.
supervisors there, counselors they can go to. But if you can't get the child to school,
Mhm.
and I had one in junior high in 7th grade, a guy, and a child that was not going to school. And I talked with the principal, and they brought their case in front of the court. And I thought, you know, we don't need to put more limits on this child. We need to find out why he's not going to
There you
school.
go. Get to the root of the
And there
problem.
was so much spousal abuse in his home against his mom that he didn't want to leave her alone during the day.
That's amazing.
And when we got that worked out, because I brought the parents to court and I said, you are the reason your child's not going to school, and here's why. And we talked about it, and the mom started crying and said, I didn't know he knew. Yeah.
It
and
sounds
so-
amazing, Terry. It's almost like you guys are police officers, judges, psychologists, school counselors. You're doing it all if you're doing your job right, right? And-
Yes,
and-
besides the death inquest of
Yes.
finding out why that person died, I spent a lot of time on that stuff, and I'd get the medical records. And I had a doctor friend at the examiner's office in Bexar County that we would send for autopsies. And I had a case, reminds me of a case, the lady had cancer. She wasn't supposed to die. Her neighbor and her were best friends. The neighbor insisted that the husband killed her.
Mhm.
Yes. And that took a lot of work. And we went to the DA about it and all that
Was that
stuff.
the case at the end?
No,
Never could prove that.
no, the doctors, it couldn't be proven.
Okay, but you
Yeah.
investigated it. You tried.
Yes, and the husband was in charge of all the medicine. So,
Never know.
you know,
Right. But
you
you all do a
just
lot.
don't
Sounds like
know.
you all do a lot
we
more.
do a lot
And-
and we care. The JPs
It sounds like we
usually
kind
care.
of like we learned about our county commissioners. They're a resource for the public to use if you know what they do, what they can do for you. The JPs are also there. It seems like in our community to help in many other ways. Wouldn't you say, John?
I
You learned
agree.
a lot today.
100%. And I think that's probably going to be the title of this show. We'll just call it Frontline Justice.
There you go.
And you guys are right there at the front lines and can directly impact.
Yeah.
And I feel much better after having visited with y'all about the state of the office of the JP within the county. I've actually learned some today.
I did too.
And hopefully our viewers and our listeners have as well. One final thing: if somebody wanted to come and be a guest in your courtroom, do you have well, Teri, obviously you don't, but do you have any prohibition against somebody coming to your courtroom?
No, in fact, we recently updated the website for Justice Court 2, Precinct 2, and our docket is online. It's available.
Oh, good.
And you can view it by Zoom.
Great.
Or you can
Sure.
come to the courtroom.
What a great.
It's a public.
that's
It's a
great.
public
We'll
venue.
have to do that one day.
That's great.
We'll do that. Well,
Yeah.
maybe we'll do that someday and
Okay.
stop by. And well, thank you so much, John. Like I said, we both learned a lot.
Absolutely.
And I think our county or some of these precincts are in good hands, right?
Yes.
And hopefully you learned a lot too today as our viewer. And I want to thank our special guest today, Dave Neighbor,
My pleasure.
and Teri Nunley. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yes. Thank y'all. Folks, if you have any questions that you would like to ask either one of these individuals, if you, for the sake of expediency and ease, if you want to email us, or if you have any ideas about topics for a show, some things that we should look into, email us at thetexasexaminer@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on social media. We're on X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook. We will post this episode to YouTube and to Rumble. We would encourage you that if you are listening to us and viewing us on YouTube, to please hit that like button, hit the bell for notifications, and subscribe. Unfortunately, we are at the mercy of the algorithms. And sometimes when you're talking about topics and subjects that are, I don't want to say,
Political.
they're political.
Yeah.
Bottom line is it's political, and everything is heavily screened and censored in that regard.
So subscribe
Whether
and
we're
like
right
us.
or not. Right? So subscribe, like us, and share. It's very important to share. Otherwise, other folks may not have the opportunity to benefit from the work, the hard work that we've all brought to you. And on that topic, I'd also like to thank Dr. Danny Kellum and Kellum Family Medicine.
Yes, we're here in his studios.
In his studios here, who's graciously allowed us to use his conference room to produce these shows for y'all. So thank you, Dr. Kellum and Kendall Family Medicine. And then also Mayday Investigations is a proud sponsor of this podcast. So
Private investigations.
Private investigations. So if any of y'all happen to need assistance with challenges that you may be experiencing in your personal life and can benefit from the use of a private investigator, we encourage you to call Mayday Investigations.
I want to thank you,
so much.
gentlemen, for the invitation and the opportunity to represent my colleagues who are
Yes, sir.
serving as justices of the peace in the county.
Thank you,
So
Judge.
happy for you to be
Yeah.
here.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome.
So, folks, I think that's all we have for you on this episode. Again, thank you for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful Kendall County day.